Hi, my name is Skip Marshall with DXC Technology.
And I'm Ben Eubanks with Lighthouse Research.
We're going to talk to you today about employee engagement in the age of acceleration and how you can optimize digital dexterity in your organization to get the best out of your people. A couple of quotes that I like to share. The first one that we'll talk about is the one from Bill Gates and how we overestimate change that's going to happen in the next 2 years. We often think a lot of stuff is going to happen. But when we look down the road over 10, we way underestimate that. That's going to be something that we're really going to key in on as we talk about what life in your organizations is going to be like.
So some of the things that you probably keep in touch with are the trends that's happening in the industry, right? And so one of the things that we do every year is we kind of look at the key trends. We talk to a lot of learning leaders, talent leaders to understand what's going on in their business, what they're seeing, what sort of things they're worried about, honestly. And some of the key trends are listed here. One of those, for example, is around AI and automation. We keep hearing about this AI stuff, this artificial intelligence, what's happening there, and a lot of people are not quite sure what that means for their role. We hear a lot about it. And so one example of how that's growing and increasing in pace is last year alone, in just the HCM industry, there was more than $500 million in investments and capital investments there. So it's not a fad. It's not going away anytime soon. It's actually increasing in pace. We're seeing a lot of growth there. Skip, which one of these trends do you think is really kind of impacting companies as well?
So I think the one that I get asked most about is really about the intelligent assistants and chatbots. Number 4 and number 6, they were really seeing impact in organizations today. And it's something that I think is just going to continue to accelerate.
Absolutely.
So a quick definition on digital dexterity. It's simply the ability and desire for organizations to exploit new and emerging technologies for better business outcomes.
So again, going back to the AI piece, right? It's about digital dexterity. It's about being ready to take the technology we have and improve what the business is doing. Some of the different areas of AI in the HR tech industry are kind of listed out here. It's all over the place, right? There's learning, there's talent management, and these things are actually in existence today. This is not a future, let's hope for this at some point. This is actually in place today. There are solutions that are doing these things, and they're solving a lot of problems, honestly.
So where do you think the biggest impacts you're seeing thus far on AI and HR?
There's a lot of stuff going on in talent acquisition, really, because there's so much volume there, right? There's so many candidates for so few jobs. And so you see a lot of volume there, but I'm really excited to see some of the things on the learning side, honestly, and so on the talent side, because we're getting better at quantifying the skills that our people have and figuring out the best ways to slot them into the right places so we can optimize performance.
Excellent. So this is an interesting statistic. So if you go back 30 years or more, you're going to find that most organizations were actually valued based on their tangible assets. It was the buildings they had. It was the products that they were building. That drove the overall value. You fast forward it to the last few years, and that statistic is flipped upside down. It's those intangibles that become the value of your organization. And that actually really changes how you start looking at your people and all of those things that are in your organization.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So speaking of those intangible assets, right, one of the quotes I ran across in a paper that I love, and I use it every chance I get, is around, if you train yourself to be a robot, you're going to be out of a job, right? Because they're just better at us in some things. You can't think harder than a machine. It's just not going to happen. And so the thing that I started thinking about, again, riffing off of Skip a little bit on the intangible assets, what sort of human skills can we develop, can we cultivate that matter more today than they did in the past, right? In this age of AI, things are automating. What human skills are really going to matter more so that we can focus on those and develop those?
So some of those are common sense. So you look at things like physical abilities, and you can see that the expected usage or need is really going to start devolving. It's going to low down. You're going to get into sensory abilities and content, and you start seeing that move up. But then you get into the critical thinking skills and the problem-solving skills, and it's going to dramatically increase because those are the innate capabilities that people have that you need to be able to leverage.
So some of those soft skills, we built a model earlier this year to kind of explore what those soft skills look like in the age of AI and automation. And some of the key soft skills are listed here. Let me give you a quick example of one of those and kind of how it works, how it fits in. So for example, Walmart has done some really extensive training around compassion, of all things. So they've automated a lot of their checkout counters. And I heard their CHRO speak earlier this year, and she said that the fastest growing part of their business is this grocery delivery service. You order them, they bring them out to your vehicle. Everybody loves it. Well, the thing is, they're actually doing compassion training with these workers to help them understand how to interact with people, how to be compassionate, empathetic. You might run into someone that you didn't see in the store because they had a disability or something else. And so they're learning how to deal with these people. And that's just an example. This job was automated away, right? The job is gone. But this new job that's evolved out of that is purely about the compassion and how they can interact with people. So it's just an example of how those soft skills are morphing kind of the way that we see work.
So what you're saying is that all the concern about losing jobs is really kind of a non-starter. They're actually changing.
You know, we don't know what's going to happen with jobs. Right? Every time jobs have been automated in the past, whether it's a technology change, a mechanical change, something else, some sort of innovation, all of the changes that have happened have actually led to more human work coming out of that, more service-oriented work. Those are always the results of those. The more things we can take away, those not very human things we're doing anyway, just the manual processes, the more human things end up being.
Right. So some changes in the future of work. If we think about how things are today and where it's going to shift, it is very different. It's a different model. As Ben was just talking about, technology displacing jobs. That's one of the concerns we have today. But if we go back in the early days in the learning space when LMSs were coming out, we said the same thing. We had our L&D organizations and our trainers, the formal trainers going, you know, the LMS is going to replace me. Well, I haven't seen a drop down in the number of L&D team members. In fact, it continues to grow. Some of the other things on money and ego, it's all about the money. It's all about the job and getting what I can get out of it. It's really going to change we look forward 10 and 15 years. It's going to be about what our passion is and what the things are going to be important to us. An interesting piece in here I think is probably worth pulling out is the gig economy. That's something that's talked about a lot. How do you see that changing in that future workplace?
So one of the things that I think that we're going to have to get much better at as learning leaders is really understanding the skills at a granular level. I talked to a company about a month ago. They have 40,000 employees, and I asked him how many employees he could actually accurately identify their skills beyond a job title. Right? That's not very descriptive. Beyond a job title, how many people can you identify their skills? He said maybe 10%. Wow. Like 36,000 employees you have around the world that you have no idea what they can do beyond their job title. We've got to get better at that, right? That's kind of a red flag. We need to get better understanding those because those are our own employees, and then it's going to shift over to the gig side, right? If we don't understand what we have, how can we understand what we need? Yep. How can we understand? You have someone right there in the front row ready to take that role on, but you don't know what they can do until you go outside and you start looking for a contractor or someone else because you don't realize that you already have that talent on hand.
Agreed.
So one of the examples of a company doing just that is Shell. Shell actually has implemented this technology to kind of understand what their internal skills are. They really want to get closer to a real-time view of the skills and the capabilities in their workplace. And so they built this thing called the Opportunity Hub, and they rolled it out to about 8,000 employees in their pilot program. And the interesting thing is they said, you know what? We already have access to these people. We already have them on hand, and now we can actually find them and tap into them. Before we were just kind of blind to those. They were already there, they were waiting, they were willing and able and ready to do work. We just had no idea who they were. But once they rolled this out, it kind of changed everything for them. They became almost a just-in-time, being able to pluck the skills out as you needed them just because they were able to identify them so quickly.
It's kind of like an internal recruiting function.
Yes, absolutely.
So one of the other things that is going to have to happen is really a realignment with how the tech parts and sides of an organization and the HR side of an organization actually work together. It's not about service or service delivery for one for the other. They really have to do this in partnership. Because the reality is they have the knowledge and skills and capabilities to be able to move the organization forward, and they need each other. So on the tech role side, it's really about understanding how do you actually shift people and focus on lifelong learning. Typically, IT workers tend to be focused on learning anyways because of the technologies that they use, but they have to look at it in an evolving cycle and kind of more broadly with the rest of the organization. You look at it on the HR side, again, it's understanding how you're going to optimize that workforce, how you're going to continue to grow it. Lifelong learning is a big piece, but how do you build culture? How do you make it more sustainable? And then how do you get the resources in place to support HR?
I was going to say, one of the things that hits me, I heard the stat years ago that if you go to school for a technology degree on today's latest technology, languages, everything else, as a programmer, almost half of what you learn by the end of graduation is obsolete, right? Because it moves so quickly. So they're the perfect partners for that.
Absolutely.
An example of a company that's done a really good job of trying to partner with their learning function, and they're actually kind of leading the IT function. The IT is actually leading some of the learning capabilities there. UnitedHealth Group had an issue, like a lot of companies. They realized that they were actually competing not just with other healthcare organizations, but with the technology companies of the world, those high-tech, cool tech companies out in Silicon Valley. They were challenged by them because they would scoop up all the best talent, and then they're left with whoever they didn't want. And they
Right.
get kind of upset about that, and I probably would too. And so they fall back a little bit. They started doing hackathons internally, not just as a cool way to bring people in, but also as a way to develop their people. So for example, they would run a class on machine learning, for example. Let's say people we need our engineers, our technical talent to know machine learning. They'd run a class on that, and then they'd actually do a hackathon, and they'd all develop using machine learning technologies and techniques in order to come up with something new and useful for the business. But also they're putting that into practice immediately. And we know, again, as learning leaders, that's the way that you cement that knowledge. It's not just a neat idea and then it passes by. You don't forget it once you've had a chance to use it. And so it's a couple birds with one stone, really.
Nice.
The lesson that they learned there, in case you're curious what that's called, it's called industry convergence. When they realized that other industries were actually converging with their own and were causing them to lose some of their talent. An example of this, the first time I heard about it a couple years ago, IBM did a study of CHROs, and right about the same time, they were talking about this industry convergence thing. The news came out that Carnegie Mellon, who had the best robotics team in the world, doing really amazing work, academic research in robotics, just breaking all these barriers and frontiers, they got all of their engineers kind of scooped up overnight, hired away by Uber, who's trying to develop this advanced robotic self-driving car fleet. And when Carnegie Mellon was thinking about competition, they were probably thinking about MIT or some of the other really top-shelf engineering schools. They weren't thinking about a private company that is, in their minds, probably almost a taxi service. They weren't thinking about being competed against in that sort of fashion. Mm-hmm. It's just an example of how we can't get comfortable. We can't just assume that, okay, our competitors in our industry are not that great, or they're not going to compete with us on those fronts. That doesn't mean that we're not going to be competitive with other people outside. So you got to be vigilant about that.
Right, and I think this is just accelerating. I was talking with a client that's in the manufacturing space, same exact thing. They started to realize they're actually competing with high-tech companies for their employees. And it's they're having to rethink how they go about doing that, because it's how do you get a high-tech person, a very technical developer to join a manufacturing company.
Yes.
This is an interesting one, not starting with technology, and it's something that I harp on.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we hear, again, there are a lot of great technology in this space, and I don't want to seem like I'm bumping against them at all, because there are some phenomenal technologies in the industry that can help you. You mentioned the LMS thing a minute ago. They've been around for a long time, and there are new technologies as well, learning experience platforms, things like that really can help us to improve our game and improve our results. But the thing is, you can't start with the technology. That's not the solution. That's not the first immediate step if you're trying to solve a problem. Some of the stats from the research that we've done in the last year show that companies that are high performing do things like, again, not technology related, they have a really strong content creation and delivery strategy. Or they will have already identified those behaviors they're looking for before the training starts. They can actually do some measurement and figure that out. Right? That doesn't seem like it's rocket science, but at the same time, there are not many companies doing it. Despite that being what the high-performing companies are doing, there's still a relatively small group of companies that are really approaching it that way. And so I don't know what it is. Why? Is it because technology is like the silver bullet? Is that why? What do you think?
I think, a lot of companies, a lot of organizations, and some individuals really just get excited about the technology. So they start thinking about, oh, that's cool. And it's the wow factor.
So, yeah.
Right, exactly. So they want to jump in. They want the newest, the brightest, the shiniest object. And without a strategy or plan to deal with it, it's not going to really take them very far. Yeah. So a couple of real quick things. We talk about the future work and the power of pull, and how forces of change are really kind of impacting individuals and organizations kind of collectively. You're looking at three different pieces. So the access, the attract, and the achieve are really three different buckets that you have to pull into. Some implications for individuals. You've got to be a lifelong learner. I mean, it's a critical piece, because you're ultimately going to be the one that's going to drive your opportunities in your career path. Organizations redesigning work and technology and learning to leverage work and learning is important. It's going to be even more important in the work of the future. The ability to source new talent and bring them into your organization, as well as developing new talent, will be critical. Some interesting things on public policy. We were actually having a conversation about this, looking at how education and lifelong education is a part of the education space, and how we actually think about it becomes critical. Organizations go and they look at how the students are being trained up and the critical skills that they're being taught. They have to have the right things in place. One other real quick piece about entering the area of the expert. So right now, you have to know everything. And it's something that you look at how you are entering your organization, working within your organization, and going through your career. That evolution, it was back when Google came out and it became a verb, right? You're going to Google something. being able to go find and source the right information, being able to understand how you get to that information, then being able to leverage that information becomes critical. Okay, so just some wrap-up thoughts. One, intangibles in the business are critical. We showed you the statistic that highlights exactly where value is driven out of organizations and how you can think about that in a different way. Ben talked about AI and machine learning and how it impacts your business, and we talked about some of the things like intelligent assistants and chatbots are being leveraged. Workforce skills are changing. Those requirements are becoming critical. What are the key pieces in workforce skills again?
Yeah, so compassion, creativity, curiosity, collaboration, and critical thinking. Those are the big five, I think, that are going to really change in the next few years.
Excellent. And then industry convergence, again, being able to look out into a workforce and a population of workers, and actually not just within your industry or within your specific vertical, if you will, but going beyond that and having to compete for workers. It's going to make a big difference to your recruiting efforts. And then finally, it's not about the technology. You got to have a process and a strategy in place to actually make your organization succeed. The technology itself is just an enabler.
Yeah, that's a step along the way, but it can't be the first step or the very last step. There's always more work to do.
Exactly, exactly. And we just want to say thank you. This was Employee Engagement, the Age of Acceleration, optimizing digital dexterity to leverage the best in your people.